Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. Hey Dave, how are you?
Good, ma'am. How are you?
Doing well.
You can hear us okay? The sound
Yep.
system working?
Yep, you sound good. Hi, Miss Freeman. Is it Freeman?
Nope, Kelly Echevarria. Hey.
Oh, good, you can say your last name.
I told you, this is like Homeland
I
Security.
practice it every day in the mirror.
I bet.
This ain't like Homeland Security. We can be friends at NRAC where we.
All right. All right. I'm
Bring
gonna,
it
oh,
So is Damon. Hi.
Hey.
Feel really important.
So happy to choose.
What?
Andy's taking a nap right here, it'd be awesome.
Did you never sit in the front row in class either?
I do now, yeah.
Yeah.
More now than I've ever had my entire life.
Yeah. I used to do it like
hi Samantha, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can. Thank you.
Are we live the whole time?
It's just-
Now we are. Shereen, are you ready to go?
Yes, yes, sir, we're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is June 23rd.
Yes, June 23rd.
I'd like to call to order the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee and ask Shereen to call the roll for us.
Thank you. Dave Fogerson,
Present?
Billy Samuels,
Present.
Andy Ancho,
Present.
Roy Anderson,
Present.
Travis, oh, okay, hi. Travis Anderson,
Present.
Noah Boyer,
Present.
Elizabeth Breeden, James Chrisley, Jason Dannon,
Here.
Cassandra Darrow, Bob Denhart,
Present.
Craig DiPolo, Kelly,
Present.
Andrea Esp, Jeannie Freeman,
Here.
Mike Heidemann,
Present.
Eric Holt, David Hunkup,
Here. I'm here.
hi,
Hi.
Jeremy Hines,
Here.
Graham Kent, Marianne LaFoon, Chris Lake,
Here.
Carolyn Levering, Ryan Miller, Tennille Pereira,
Here.
Matthew Peterson,
Present.
Sean Ronmeyer,
Present.
Misty Robinson,
Here.
Rachel Skidmore, Corey Zolfarino, Melinda Southard, Carrie Underwood,
I'm here.
yay, Mike Wilson,
Present.
Stephanie Woodard, Bunny Bishop,
Present.
Rebecca Bernard, Kate Callahan, Felix Castanola,
Present.
Mike Dizak, Melissa Friend,
Here.
Cheryl Gonzalez, Maura Howenstein, Jill Hemingway, Patricia Herzog,
Here.
Casey, Selby Marks,
Here.
Catherine Nielsen,
Here.
Samantha Laddick,
Here.
we have quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll move on to item number 2 for public comment. This is discussion only. No action may be taken upon a matter raised under this item of the agenda until the matter itself has been specifically included on an agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Public comment may be limited to 3 minutes per person, discretion of the chair. Comments will not be restricted based upon viewpoint. Provide testimony during this period of public comment via telephone. Please call in any time after 1 o'clock on the day of the meeting by dialing the phone number. If you are calling in on the phone and would like to do public comment, please press *6 to unmute yourself. I'll open it up for any public comment from board members, anyone on Zoom or anyone on the phone. Okay, just to give us a couple of seconds for the telephone, if anybody's following along on YouTube channel with us, I'll give a quick public comment just to eat up some time. I attended the Governor's Homeland Security Council meeting for all 50 states virtually 2 weeks ago. And they came up with some priorities that I thought were pretty interesting. So I wanted to share them with the group, and we'll make sure they're in the minutes so you can see them as well. They have 5 priorities. They're looking at public health preparedness as their number 1 priority. They're looking at cyber as their number 2 priority. Counterterrorism is 3. Natural disasters and extreme weather is 4. And school safety is 5. So I thought that fit pretty well with what we've been talking about here in Nevada for some time now. And their focus items were on domestic terrorism, public health preparedness, cyber, and then sustainable funding for homeland security concerns. And so I thought that all tied in well with our discussions we've had in the past, and wanted to make sure the committee could get the input from that. That was a 2 days worth of meetings, so I summed it up into 9 items. I would like some credit for that from anybody. And I'll open up for any more public comment. Okay, again, if you're on the phone, *6 to unmute yourself. See no public comment. We'll move on to item number 3, which is approval of the minutes. This is discussion, possible action. We'll discuss and review the minutes from May 27, 2021 committee meeting. The committee may vote to amend and approve or approve the minutes as provided.
Chief Jeannie Freeman, for the record, I move to approve the minutes from the May 27, 2021 meeting as written and submitted.
Kelly Echeverria, I second that motion.
First from Dr. Freeman, a second from Kelly. Any discussion on the item?
Minor point, I actually attended the meeting, but didn't make roll call, so I was there.
Okay. We'll mark Pola as present.
I accept the amendment. Jeannie Freeman, for the record, I accept the amendment.
I second.
Okay. It's been accepted for the motion makers. Any further questions or comments on the motion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we'll move on to item number 4. This is State of Nevada's emergency communication. This is a discussion item only. Melissa Friend will provide the committee an update on the State of Nevada's 911 system and overview of the capabilities of the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alert system through Code Red. Melissa.
I'm Melissa Friend, for the record. Thank you for having me speak on the 911 and the alerting systems. For the 911, we're continuing to work on maintaining or acquiring a 911 coordinator, or at least a designee for the state of Nevada, to help us move forward with some available FCC grants to help local jurisdictions. I want to thank everybody who's already provided me the required annual FCC data. I've gotten the majority of the state in to date, which is wonderful. For the EAS and WIA through Code Red for iPods, the wireless alerting system, I want to make sure that everybody is aware that we can use that statewide. The rural jurisdictions had some confusion on the ability for them to send out WIAs. They're not as encompassing as the actually alerting system. So the WIAs go out to the cell phones only. We had a situation in the rural community where a truckload of bees overturned and created a huge hazard, especially for incoming first responders. They didn't have the ability to send out a WIA. We rectified that situation. So we'll get something sent out statewide to help emergency managers that outline that ability to send out those alerts should they need it.
Any committee members with questions for Melissa? Melissa, I know there's a large wildland fire in Douglas County. They use the WIA system.
So they did use the WIA system. Ron Skagen, I spoke with him as an AAR after that. A couple lessons learned is it's really hard to send out those WIAs on an iPad. Much easier on a desktop computer due to the drawing of the polygons. And also to make sure that you click the right buttons and do your polygons as opposed to just sending out a blanket email. An initial WIA came out to the entire Quad counties where he was really specific to the Douglas Carson area, or he wanted to be specific. Luckily, it wasn't a big deal for that specific alert. But moving forward, he thought the messaging went out really well and didn't hear any complaints from anybody.
Okay, perfect.
Chief Jeannie Freeman for the record. Melissa, is there any movement now that we're kind of able to come back together and do some trainings and things like that to maybe do some refresher trainings for our communities related to, because there have been shifts in personnel and so forth?
Absolutely. We actually have training scheduled for City of Las Vegas sometime this summer, and I'm hoping to go down to sit in on that one, make sure that that's what we would want to bring up to this state level. And as soon as I go to do that training, we'll get something set up here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe as a follow-up, maybe as a suggestion, maybe there is something that can be done at the NEPA conference or something that can be tied to that. Just education for those about the alerting systems, and it may be another way to bring in some of our other partners in emergency management that tend to sit on the fringe.
Absolutely. I'll make that suggestion on that.
Okay, who's running the NEPA conference? It's in Vegas this year. Who's the planning committee for that?
So this is John Backett. Clark County is the host, and Matt is the past chair. He's supporting as the backup. So it's running primarily out of Billy's office with Cheryl Nagy as the POC for the planning efforts.
Kelly Echeverria for the record. DEM put on a training, alert training 2018, 2019 with Adrian Abbott, who did the training here. And it was really beneficial. So I would suggest her.
You can definitely bring her back in as well.
Yeah.
So this is John Backett again. I also would let you know we had to take an IS 247B class. It's horrible. It's got some very relevant information and gives you the backbone of everything you need. I would recommend everybody take that before they take the fun in-person stuff, because it gives you the historical process, the current status, the different programs that are run through what Melissa coordinates in the state, and the different messaging we can give and how we give it.
How many hours is that, John?
Long. Plan on about 4 hours to take it, because you might have to take the test more than once.
Is this what you do over the weekend? Kind of?
Glass of wine, feet up.
Okay, got it.
Okay, any other questions for Melissa on the WIA system or on the 911? Really want to encourage everyone that has not gotten that 911 data back to us to get that data back to us. Melissa's going to send out an update again to those that we're still missing it from, so that way we can get a good accounting to the FCC and kind of get out the naughty kid list and maybe see what we can do to get some grant funding available for our local jurisdictions to be able to actually improve our 911 systems in the state. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5 then. Item number 5 is State Warehouse Emergency Operations Plan. This is discussion only. For John Backendall, DM's coordinating with the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, Public Health Preparedness, and the Division of Purchasing for a long-term plan for personal protective equipment and other emergency preparedness and response resources. The committee will hear a detailed explanation of the current status of the warehouse operations and a goal for long-term resilience. John?
Excellent. John Backett for the record. I got a 240-page report here I'm going to read in person line by line. Just kidding. So very small plan. It's a high-level strategic capability of the transition from DEM primarily to public and behavioral health, with the emphasis of our partners at state purchasing being the owners of the facility. So it's currently called the Warehouse Transition and Internal Operations Control, Operational Controls. And it details an introduction as to what we did in acquiring the massive amounts of PPE that we currently have, and how we ended up where we are. So we currently have 2 warehouses, one in northern Nevada and one in southern Nevada, and both are currently operational. Both of them have current leases until the end of this calendar year. So come December 31st, 2021, we need to have funding available to continue the operation. The plan long-term is to, from that date, December 31st to June 30th, 2022, close and completely disengage from Northern Nevada warehouse operations and fill local emergency management and public and behavioral health warehouse to their capacity, and then transport everything else down south and maintain a Southern Nevada operation in perpetuity for the next possible event. So with this plan, it details the purpose, the mission, and the objectives, and it primarily speaks to a successful transition to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health to manage the PPE with DEM oversight or participation, with state purchasing actually facilitating the receipt and shipment of PPE to jurisdictions in time of need. We are going to continue with the current RRF process. So the form that DEM uses is what the Division of Public and Behavioral Health will use. You will submit that form to the DEM logistics email. So we're keeping it simple on the locals, nothing changes. You submit your form, Public and Behavioral Health is going to monitor that email, and they'll be coordinating filling the PPE. If it's an emergency need, there won't be many questions, that PPE will be met. If you're looking to purchase PPE from the warehouse at the current rate, which we're hoping will be a plan that is formulated from federal government to state government to local government in a buying purchasing power fashion, to where we will get from the feds and we will push to the locals before it expires, and you'll have PPE for use. Should something expire, we're going to maintain it and distribute it for exercise purposes. That way people can not waste their own PPE as they continue to train up for different operations. We put a timeline in here, and it starts on multiple phases, from transitioning meeting operations to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, which starts July 1. So this is all taking effect very quickly. The start of our next fiscal year, we're transitioning some powers to them. They're going to immediately take over all COVID meetings. So the only meeting we currently maintain is the one from yesterday, Tuesday afternoon at 1:30, the local emergency manager meeting with all local, tribal, county, and private sector emergency managers, and some feds that jump in on there. And they're also going to now start taking over the training opportunity to learn our process of taking the resource request and working with the local jurisdiction to process those orders. By September 13th, you know, we no longer have the National Guard. So we're actually working with the local jurisdictions to demobilize as many of those resources as possible. So with that practice, we've gotten rid of all of our resources here in the EOC. We continue to have up to 12 of their staff currently maintaining our warehouses. That's going to end on July 8th. They'll be under contract with the division here, emergency management, as contract employees until the end of the year. So we have that already built into our planning and funding efforts. After that, we'll have to see where we're at on funding for, again, both the warehouse operations and the staffing of it. As the plan continues, it details in a timeline fashion how we're going to transition from the Division of Public and Behavioral Health over to state purchasing. It has a little org chart that details who's in charge and where we fit underneath that agency of state purchasing. It details the ordering management, the receiving, the regional warehouse properties, and how we plan on processing PPE as we move forward. We also included some internal controls to help in that transition so that nothing changes. You won't see a difference. Similar to DEM going to the Office of the Military, the PPE warehouse should not see any change in the way things are currently operating. So where are we at? We have the leases signed. We moved last week and this week in Southern Nevada from the convention center, where we've basically been squatting for over a year, to a rented facility that we have under contract until the end of this year. Why the end of this year? Because that's when we had funding pre-approved for CARES money and other funding to help the purchasing program and the PPE dispersal out of warehouse operations for COVID response. After that, we don't have a funding allocation. So the state agencies that are engaged in this process would not allow us to sign a longer contract. We hope that we can work that out over the next couple of weeks through different funding mechanisms, including possibly some federal funding, to where we can maintain a lease in northern Nevada until June of 2022, and then again, completely shut the warehouse down and move out and no longer have a northern operation. From there, continue the lease in southern Nevada from December 31st to June 30th of 2022. And at that point, purchasing will hopefully have a warehouse purchased, have it in place, and we can move all PPE into their warehouse operation and continue the efforts through state purchasing and the Division of Public and Behavioral Health moving forward. And again, trying to develop some more policy and procedure from the feds to the state to the locals on PPE management and preparing for the next epidemic, pandemic, big event that somebody needs PPE for. That's the end of my report, John. So currently the health point of contact is their SNS program person, James Fan. So James Fan, P-H-A-N, he is the Division of Public and Behavioral Health Strategic National Stockpile, SNS liaison to the federal government. So he manages all of their current PPE operations. He has access to our current inventory and has been visiting with us and working with us for several months now. So he'll be the main point of contact. If you have any questions, you don't have James's information, Melinda Southard is his supervisor, Amos is his direct supervisor, Amos Holler. So there's a whole team over there at Public and Behavioral Health that would help us and be able to facilitate information and whatnot. And we'll continue to update this group and all county emergency managers on any changes that happen.
Perfect. Any questions for John? Sorry, John, we've been on mute that entire time. You have to restart.
Jeannie Freeman for the record. I know that our county emergency manager is getting those notifications. Is there a way for us to ensure that public health, and that way we can communicate with our healthcare coalitions as well, since we have those intimate relationships with them?
So this is in draft and we've been going back and forth. This is John Backetall again. So we have not pushed it out to everybody yet because it's draft and PHP, DBPH, their leadership hasn't approved it yet. And neither has Dave as a final product. So once it's released, it's going to go out on the listserv, and health will push it out on their listservs as well. So everybody has all the information. There's not anything top secret. We just want to make sure that we're truly tying people to what they've agreed to and what their obligations are going to be moving forward. No surprises to anyone, especially those that now have a lot of responsibility.
Okay. Follow up with that. And part of the reason for that is that with healthcare coalitions, there are several within the state, and some of them have created their own PPE caches as sort of that small stopgap before we have these other things. And I think that that's important for us to be able to build into our plans to be able to make sure that we're keeping our partners updated on. That's not something that at least the Quad County Coalition plans to get rid of. We still want that stopgap, because even with a warehouse in a state, there's still a time frame challenge that can be there with getting some of those materials.
So this is John again for the record. There is several layers of complications with PPE stockpiles. Number one, if anything was purchased with PA, once the incident's over, you're gonna have to write a check back to FEMA for anything you received under PA. So we're trying to push out all the PA, PPE we have and get it used up under emergency or anything vaccine related. So the stockpile that we're going to maintain, the 60 days of the highest peak from March and April of 2020, from all hospitals, coalitions, clinics, and responders, that's where we got the number from. That PPE was purchased by CARES. So we have a much more flexible avenue to distribute and use versus being tied to a specific timeline of public assistance PPE. So if you have CARES money and you bought something with PA, you might want to change the funding avenue that you used so that when you maintain your PPE, just know when the incident's over, so is your access to PA and anything you bought with PA.
Jeannie, your comment about including PHP, I'd really like to include the PHP leads for each of the county, or for the 3 health agencies and then for the state on our monthly EM calls. Do you feel that's appropriate as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've been on them. I know we've been on that response, but I think that there's a lot of, granted, we're an ESF, right? So we're your ESF 8 entity, but there's just that human factor with pretty much anything that goes on, and it's beneficial. I think that I've seen that in our region, having health entities be so closely tied with emergency management. Plus we get free lunch every once in a month.
Misty, are you on from Southern Nevada Health District? Would you concur with that be something that'd be worthwhile for you is to still maintain that emergency manager, public health preparedness phone call once a month?
Yeah, I'm fine with keeping it. I do think that it provides some value. Sorry, we weren't able to get, or I was not able to get on the call yesterday. I had a conflicting appointment, but yeah, I think those are still, especially since our positivity rate is going up right now. We're slow slightly, but it's still going up. So they're still beneficial.
Perfect, thank you, ma'am. And John, besides the PPE and all of the gallons that we have that we'd love to give to anybody that wants some, what else is in the warehouse besides PPE? Because I know we sent out a list before. Are there other things that people might be interested in?
So I hope it was included on the list. I honestly didn't go through it. This is John again, sorry for the record. We have over 6,000 PAPRs and our 60-day supply was 3,000. So we're looking at decreasing the PAPR supply because one, it takes up a lot of space, and two, we don't need to maintain 6,000 PAPRs when they can be used for other purposes. They're nice. They're not pieces of junk, very good equipment. We have currently the high flow nasal cannula kits, so people don't necessarily need to have COVID to be put on one of those. There's other respiratory conditions that those can assist with. We're going to maintain the PHP stockpile of mobile hospitals in the facilities as well. And then we currently have some other stuff that was left behind by American Red Cross. So we joke about it internally, but we have some 30,000 rakes left and cases and cases and cases of those green and yellow sponges. So if you're looking for any sort of cleaning supplies stuff, American Red Cross left that stuff behind as well. Most of the other stuff is PPE related. We do have some sharps containers. It's not something we're looking to maintain long term. So we're going to stick with the main objects that we were able to see was the big need when COVID started, the basic PPE elements that both responders and healthcare workers were able to use.
Perfect. Anyone have any questions for John? Awesome. Thank you very much, John. We'll move on to item number 6, the intent of the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee, NRAC. This is discussion only. The chair and the vice chair will lead a discussion on the intent behind.
Hi, this is Marianne Lassoon. I just wanted to let you know I've joined the call.
Hi, Marianne. Thanks for joining us. We're going to discuss the intent behind NRAC, previous committees that were rolled into NRAC through legislative or executive actions, and the expectation NRAC members provide advice and counsel to increase Nevada's resilience. And Billy and I forgot to talk about this beforehand. And so I'll open up, I got some notes written down, but I want to make sure that you get, if you want to go first and give some comments first, or if you want me to go.
No, this is Billy Samuels. Chief and I were talking about what this is looking like, what this committee should be handling, how many other subcommittees that this took care of. I just want to make sure that we talk about what those are. And then I'd also like to discuss, if we can, note under this agenda item is attendance as well. Making sure that we do follow the bylaws that this interacts under. A lot of people have not been attending the meetings. I think that's pretty important that we need to talk about either now or look at the committees themselves, or moving forward as an agenda item, or send an email out to all the committee members, seeing the importance of whether or not they're going to be on it or not.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, sir. If I think if most of us, or many of us, were on this committee when it got started by the division 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And it was trying to clean up some of the standing committees that DEM had at the time. I believe there's 27 groups that Division of Emergency Management had established through the years. The Earthquake Safety Council, there's a flood group, there was the Emergency Managers Coordinating Committee to provide advice to the chief. There's a lot of those little groups that were out there through the years. And so the division kind of rolled everything into NRAC through the legislative process, and then through the power of the chief to dissolve the committees that chiefs prior had created. Currently, we do keep the NRAC. We have the INTEC for our tribal emergency managers. We have the State Disaster Identification Coordination Committee, and then we added, and we have the IMAS, the Incident Management Assistance Committee.
System and Compact.
System and Compact. And then we also have just reconstituted, and they haven't had their first meeting yet, the hazard mitigation work group. So we're down to 5 committees from 27. One of the things that I think that we need to do, and you talk about cleaning up the roster, now that I've assigned some people to the hazard mitigation work group, some of those people were prior or are current members of this committee. So I'll probably send out emails to see if you want to continue to serve on this committee, because this committee was supposed to also be that hazard mitigation work group. But we kind of lacked the ability to do a lot of what they needed done to meet the FEMA requirements for that, to meet the FEMA requirements to maintain our enhanced hazard mitigation state status. And so I might talk to some of the people that are on here representing different specialty groups to see if you want to continue to be on this committee, or if you'd like to step down and just be on the hazard mitigation group, then give us the advice and counsel on the hazard mitigation group instead. That way we can maybe free up some people's times. The other nice thing we have is that we don't have to meet monthly anymore. We meet quarterly. We just have to figure out, I haven't had a chance yet to look at legislation to see if it goes in effect July 1st, October 1st, or January 1st. So I got to find what day we actually get to go to the quarterly meeting. So we are planning a July meeting for that. But another thing that Chief Samuels and I talked about was trying to get us back in person more often. So that way, here in Carson, there's what, 6, 7 of us here, and seeing people in person keeps us more motivated to have free reign discussions. Still want to keep the Zoom channel open, so that way we don't have to always get in person, but when we can gather, it helps us to maybe share some ideas, thoughts. And some of my intent for this group is to provide that sage advice and counsel to Chief Samuels as the urban area administrator and myself as a state agency administrator, or the state administrative agent, to vet our grants for us. Before, this also took place at the Homeland Security Working Group. So that was the group that used to do it, but it was very specific on the Homeland side and didn't really look at the all hazard nature of these grants. And so we got to make sure we're still vetting those grants. I want this group to discuss emerging issues, just like I shared with what the Governor's Homeland Security Council was talking about as their priorities, looking at those emerging issues of cyber or drought and seeing how we make things better for the state, how we have those plans, how we're ready for those things. Housing, mass migration, all the things that we're all on the hook for our constituents and for our grant funding opportunities. To provide advice on priorities, so that way you keep us going down the right road at the division. Sharing information, best practices, like Melissa was talking about with the IPAWS and what Douglas County had done, and then that the rural county that was going to do it for the bees, and sharing best practices, that way we can all learn from one another and improve our profession of the state and our standing and keep our public safer. The brainstorming sessions, that way we can have ideas and brought back and how do we do stuff. Feedback, because I do turn myself a good idea fairy at times. And so I sometimes need someone to put me back in a check to say that might be a really good idea, but that we can't accomplish. Stewardship, cooperation, collaboration, and meta leadership. And then letting me know how I and the division support you so you can support us and we can support you. Because it's a very collaborative relationship between the state and locals, trying to make sure that we're on the right page with everything that FEMA is asking for us, everything the Department of Homeland Security is asking for us, and Department of Energy is asking for us, and managing the expectations of our public. So those are kind of the expectations I wrote from me to the committee, because when you read the NRS, the committee was designed to provide Billy and I advice. Does anybody else have any other ideas on what you want to see this committee do, or ideas on what you think we should be focusing on, or am I out of line with some of my expectations of you to provide advice to us?
Hey, Chief, this is Billy Samuels. I'd also like to see if we can have a standing quarterly meeting instead of trying to just guess dates. If it's the second Tuesday of the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, that would help all of our calendars, and I think we can make ourselves more available instead of wondering when it might be.
Absolutely. And we had that years ago, and then that thing called COVID, like 12 years ago before COVID hit, because it seems like last year's been about 11 of those years. And so I'd like to get back on that. That way we do that as well, because that would save all of us.
Chief Jeannie Freeman, for the record, following up on that, I think that impacts the attendance requirements for this committee. So I think there's a certain number that you're allowed to miss before you're booted off. And if we're on quarterly meetings, then somebody could technically miss half the year. And I think that it's inappropriate for them to miss half a year, but then they're present for the funding half of the year.
And next meeting, that is a very valid point. Next meeting, let's put on the agenda, knowing that we got legislative approval to go to this quarterly meeting, let's put the, what's that thing called?
Attendance.
No, the charter, the
Bylaws.
the bylaws. Let's put the bylaws back on the things on the agenda so we can talk about that. And maybe include some of these intent of behind what the meeting is. So that way then as future generations roll on, they're not trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing or why we're supposed to be doing it.
I'd like to follow up on that. I think it's important to have those who, I know we have the urban area funding stuff that comes through. We have the stuff that Kelly oversees. So when we look at some of the timing of those meetings, maybe looking at the timing that also fits with what the time tends to roll with those so that we don't find ourselves up against a wall and struggling to get things approved and going in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we were all very excited when that only having 4 meetings per year passed, but I think we're gonna have some alteration of that, maybe that between the first and second quarter, we're having 3 meetings in a row in those months to do that grant items that we need. So we might have 7 meetings a year, but we're only required to have 1 per quarter. So we kind of make some allowances there.
I would also suggest that you and Chief Samuels have a discussion about what you think your intent is about the timing of those meetings. As a committee member, if you're going to be asking people if they want to stay on the committee or if they want to be somewhere else, what is their time commitment? It may sound great that it's once a quarter or maybe 7, but is it an 8-hour day? Is it a 4-hour day? Is it a 1-hour meeting? What does that look like? So that may have some impact on their willingness to make that commitment.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. I think we'll have to get some experience seeing how the quarterly meetings work. I don't see them running more than a couple hours with the exception of the grant meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had before where that grant meeting went, I think 6 hours, but we cut it down from 16
Right.
that we had allocated because of how we figured out to run the process and everyone's participation. So I'd like to, maybe we look at that as time goes on because we don't need to have a meeting just to have a meeting and we don't have a meeting just to talk.
Right. Other follow-up on that is, sorry, Jeannie Freeman for the record. I've been lucky enough to be on this committee since the beginning. So I've seen how it's evolved and some of the things that have happened and so forth. I think it's important to reiterate that our responsibilities on this committee are about the state and that they're not jurisdiction related. So we may be on here and our titles and who we represent may be about may have our jurisdiction name on them. And certainly when it comes to grant funding, we may be giving a presentation that's related to our jurisdiction, but our responsibilities are about what's for the best situation of the state, not for us to be in jurisdictional territory, because truly the diversity of the committee is about the roles. So you have public health representation, you have emergency management representation, you have all this dynamic that's there. It's not about my jurisdiction's not represented. That's not what this committee was intended for, and that's not what any of those subcommittees that went into this one were intended for.
Agree. You got to say it loud, so I think.
Yeah, this is Billy. I agree 100% is, obviously we all care about our jurisdictions and that's our main focus and that's why we're all here for representing them. But as far as this committee, this is a Nevada Resiliency Advisory Committee, not a Clark County Advisory Committee or a Quad County or a Washoe. So I think moving forward, we all kind of need to keep that in mind when we do our voting, our ranking structures when it comes to funding, because it is important. I know it's hard and it's a tough pill when you see stuff going to other counties that's not yours, but if that's where the threat is for that time, that's what it is. So.
And I completely concur with that. And it's always a hard place to put yourself in because when I worked for local government, I was on a lot of state committees. And I'd always come back and I get beat up by somebody in my local jurisdiction because I voted against something that they wanted. and they thought I was carrying their water. And I've always felt that if I'm on a state committee, I gotta look statewide at those efforts. So I think that's something that we gotta keep in mind with our group as well, is that same thing. You might get beat up at home a little bit, but we gotta do what's right because we have a very limited amount of resources to spread through a lot of stuff. And how do we pick the right places for that? What's the right threat? And can you argue that the city of Las Vegas is more or less important than the town of Jackpot because they experience the same threat? So should they have the same level of capability, just scalable based upon the size of the communities?
So this is John Beckett. I'd like to add to that. It's imperative that we keep it non-targeted towards our jurisdictions. CERC does the same thing. We know we have tribal partners. We know that we have rural, we have urban, we have private sector on that commission. With that, we never say where they're from unless they're briefing out on something that impacted their jurisdiction, which would be exactly what would be represented here. If all of a sudden Carson City had something that was a huge impact to them and they were coming to this committee saying, all right, this didn't work, we need to change this so it helps support my agency better, then that's a direct to his jurisdiction. But otherwise, I agree with what you two brought up, both Billy and Jeannie, on it's a statewide or a Nevada committee, and it's your job to make sure that we have a well representation across the state. We don't need to define where they're from.
Absolutely, good point. Other comments from anyone else on the committee or on our Zoom platform with us?
Yeah, I'll just note, since I was on the Earthquake Safety Council and that's kind of gone into this and things, that there has been a loss of public engagement, influence and leadership kind of thing, at least with regard to earthquakes. And I think that's kind of okay for a while, trying to gauge where people are and preparedness and various things. What we've done is kind of shifted that responsibility to the locals. And that's not a bad thing at all. And I recently went through county mitigation plans, and I was really pleased to see the level of sophistication and things in them these days, and that things like unreinforced masonry buildings were addressed there and things like that. But anyway, it just kind of, it is something that used to happen before, and it was critical before because we had a very low understanding of earthquakes. And so we have a little more sophisticated audience these days, I think. And but keep it in mind that, and I'm not sure when we might know. It might be when a lot of bad things happen, like an earthquake just takes out tons of mobile homes, or some particular sector is really impacted, and we have work to do to make people more resilient in Nevada in that regard. So anyway, just mentioning it, not really advocating a change or anything. I am looking forward to the working group continuing to reinforce things. And just keep that in the back of your mind, that there's a shift in the way some things are done. For sure, that means that most of the earthquake promotion is not happening. But there's a lot of momentum there for a while anyway. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
No, great comments. Thank you for those, Dr. DePolo. And that was really what sold me on making that hazard mitigation working group back, because it's not just the earthquakes, it's the floods, it's all those different events there. And so making that hazard mitigation group, so they can focus on those targets and how to help our locals get better at it. And then July 1st, our public information officer will be very heavily involved with pushing a lot of media messaging for us on our different social media platforms, and getting more involved and seeing how we can get some of those mitigation messages out. So hopefully we can get kind of the band all back together using that hazard mitigation work group, and then our transition office in the military and the use of our public information officer to try to make some of the stuff back in the public's eye. I think we've proven our worth as emergency management. People now know what emergency management is, just like they know what a biostatistician is. Still can't say it, but I can spell it. But people know what it is now after COVID. So I don't want to lose that momentum that we've gained through the process. So thank you for your comments. Does anybody else have any comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 7, the legislative update. This is discussion only. The committee will be provided with the outcome of the recent 2021 legislative session that pertains to DEM, Homeland Security, and statewide resilience. So the high level overview is our 3 bills passed, AB 14, SB 14, and then the bill that moved us to Office of the Military. So there's some changes in the frequency of our meetings. State Disaster Identification Committee that, as we talked about in prior meetings, now gets to meet once a year at call of the chair. And then InTech and NRAC all now meet quarterly. So that way we can clean up and make the language the same. And we cleaned up who was required to present to the division a emergency operations plan. We got rid of some of the smaller companies that actually didn't have any infrastructure in Nevada, but were required by prior regulation to produce a plan. And then our bill to move us to Office of Military did go through. We made no changes to the operation of the division, other than the old language said that we had to deposit the money in the treasury in the state of Nevada. When we crossed it out, because that was kind of a duh. Yeah, we know we have to do that rather than have that in there. That's the only item we took out of that legislation. So the only change you should see is if you want to complain about me, you got to go to General Barry instead of Director Togliatti now. So that should be the only change. Hopefully you'll see we got new letterhead, new all that stuff this week that we'll start sending out so that way you can see what we're going to be looking like. And then that also takes the handcuffs off our public information officer, who will start doing some more stuff for us. I do have a full listing of all the BDRs that affect emergency management that I will get to Shereen to send out to the group. I just haven't had a chance yet to sit down on my email because of the integrated emergency management class that we've had and get that out to everyone. So I apologize for that. Does anybody have any questions or additional items on this agenda item?
Chief, this is Jeannie Freeman for the record. Do the email addresses change?
Yes, our email address will change, and we're still working with the state on that. We're hoping to do the same as what our website is right now, which is dem.nv.gov.
Okay.
So that way we can maintain some consistency there.
Will that change things as far as emails for where the RRF forms go or any of that kind of stuff, the logistics stuff?
So this is John Backetall for the record. We use Gmails on those for that very reason. So if
Understood.
the state system goes down, we don't get hosed.
Okay.
So every now and again, Gmail goes down, but then we use other redundancies. So that won't change for you guys. And Melissa's working with EATS to where we have a transition to where if you send it to our old email, it's still going to get forwarded to us. And we'll just work over the time to educate up to send it to the right location.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on item number 7? Okay, we'll move to item number 8. This is the final chance for public comment, discussion only. Just as before, no action may be taken on a matter related to this item until it's actually on an agenda. Anybody with public comments, and if you are on the phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself. Any public comment? Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll move to item number 9. This is a motion for adjournment. Would anybody like to let us go home?
Mike Wilson, motion to adjourn.
Bob Denhart, second.
Mike Wilson with the first, Bob Denhart with the second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Who wants to stay longer, say no. Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you guys all for your participation.